Hello and welcome to this podcast from ChangeBASE. We're here with Chris Jackson. He is the Principal Application Compatibility Consultant from Microsoft, aka the App Compat guy. We've also got Greg Lambert. He's the Chief Technical Architect at ChangeBASE. And so today we're going to be talking about IE, Internet Explorer. We're going to start by talking about the impact that IE8 has had on migrations. We're going to then talk about the enterprise take-up of IE9. And then we're going to talk about IE10. Is it better to wait for IE10 and skip out IE9 completely, or is it better to upgrade as you go? So Chris, please start for us. What impact has IE8 had on enterprise migrations?
The impact has been increasing, and at this point what we're finding is that Internet Explorer application compatibility is the #1 obstacle to deployments of Windows 7, which kind of crept up on us a little bit. It wasn't that it was the hardest technical problem, and therefore a bunch of nerds seemed to kind of not pay as much attention to it as we might have. In the past it was the Windows applications themselves. In the past, I'd say probably a year or so, it's really crept up as being the #1 source of issues that would block a deployment of Windows 7.
Hi, it's Greg here from ChangeBASE. Chris, is there any sort of example you might have of one thing that's causing this web-based block? Because we've seen some great examples in enterprise clients of a single app, like a timesheet, a web-based timesheet application that stops the migration because people can't set their hours or do all their HR stuff on the new platform because one particular app won't be compatible with IE8. But is there a simple example or the top one or two things that seems to creep into these compatibility issues for IE8?
There are both technical and business explanations. So let's take it up a level first and kind of talk about what are the categories that we're seeing. The top category is, is it a problem with it doesn't work? Or is it a problem that it's not supported? And that's where things get fairly difficult in that, if it doesn't work, that's a technical challenge, and that's something that engineers can help with. And when we look at, well, what's causing the technical challenges, a lot of that is insufficient knowledge, and therefore people aren't leveraging the compatibility infrastructure that we build into the browser. So
Right.
The ability to pretend we're living in an ancient era and actually go back and use Quirks mode, which Quirks mode is fundamentally IE5.5 compatibility.
Yep.
There are a lot of websites running today in IE6 that are running in that compatibility because in IE6, IE5.5 was the one right beforehand. And I've talked about in articles and such that there's a little bug in IE6 that puts more websites into Quirks mode than it ought to have.
Right.
We fixed the bug, therefore promoting a lot of sites and not getting it working there. So I think the first obstacle we have is a technical one of making sure that people understand the compatibility infrastructure, are intentionally choosing when to use it and when not to use it, so that they will get themselves out of reliance on compatibility with very old implementations of standards, and sort of eliminating a lot of things before they get started. Beyond that, then there are the issues. I mean, we can talk in details about the specifics, but the big general issue of what causes it is that it looks like there's a lot of stuff broken until you go in and eliminate a lot of that low-hanging fruit. I
Right.
think what's more difficult is the support side, which is it looks like it works just fine. We don't have it failing per se, but we don't have the vendor supporting it, and it's really critical. So the big third-party applications, the sort that you pay a few $1 million for and then spend many more millions of dollars customizing to your environment, and that in and of itself is a 12 to 18-month project sometimes. The fact that it works doesn't really matter if it's not supported and you've not kept that particular application up to date. So it's kind of two big challenges, helping technically to get through that faster, understand the state of where things are, as well as also understanding how to get something that has the support characteristics that you need.
It's interesting, as you say, it's technical, but it's also the political commercial. And I think, you mentioned a great example there of, like a CRM app or something like that, that it's millions of dollars to buy, millions of dollars to configure, and it may work. It looks like it's working, but with the depth and complexity of those applications, do they? And so you've got this massive testing surface to handle. And if you're looking at something like that, well, what's the risk of a 0 being in the wrong spot in an order? Or what's the risk of somebody's names being gone, right? So, some sort of arbitrary error like that being generated due to a compatibility issue. So the risk is quite high. So I think one of the things you mentioned in previous discussions as well is that it's the unknown for those as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the complexity, when you talk about testing, and let's kind of get into the complexity of testing, if we simply leave people to their own devices to determine how the compatibility infrastructure is used, then there's also much greater complexity. So, let's take an example of I'm developing, a web application that does a timesheet. Let's go back to your first example.
Yep.
And if I'm doing a timesheet application, I just give it to IE, and I think, okay, IE is going to handle this. Well, IE, as of IE 8, is really 3 different rendering engines. I mean, in 6 it was 2,
right.
in 7
That's
it was 2, in 8 it's 3, and 9 it's 4. And the one I happen to be running in, if the developer doesn't choose it, depends entirely on the customer and the zone they happen to have zoned that application into. So it might behave differently running on the developer's desktop as a local .htm file than it would for a user who has that zoned to the local intranet zone, which might be different still from the user who has it zoned to the internet zone if the developer doesn't choose that. So there's potential variance in configuration, which is why we, from a product perspective, we added in the ability to specify I want to run in this mode, but then that incurs additional long-term testing considerations of you don't necessarily want to leave it in an old mode for a really long time.
Yep.
I don't know if you read, I put a blog post up, what was it, last week? Yeah, it was just last week, where we were doing some testing because there were, a question came in from a customer of, okay, so I've got some scripts and I've got these 4 different modes in IE9. Is any one faster than the other one?
Yeah, it's interesting.
And I'm like, well, actually, I didn't know the actual numbers, so I said, let's go to a benchmark and let's run it in all 4 modes. Yep. And there's a drastic difference between running in 9 mode and 8 mode versus running in 7 mode or 5.5 mode or Quarks mode, if you will. And so from an ongoing, let's optimize my applications, it would be nice to know not only can I make it work in any mode whatsoever, but how far can I take this, because I'm going to get some immediate performance benefits if I'm able to go further.
Yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. Like I said, people will think, oh, I switched the modes, it now loads my graphic, whatever previous compatibility issue appears to disappear. But there is a price to pay for that, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think there's some of the complexity in administrating that. You get a number of rendering engines and a different number of modes, so like a matrix of different possibilities how that might be configured. So
we had an issue that came up, which is that the doc type that they were providing, they were actually thinking they were asking for standards mode, but they were providing one of those sort of strange edge case doc types that we looked at and go, okay, if you're asking for this particular flavor of HTML and you don't include the URL, then you'll still get Quarks mode, even though you have a doc type. And so they were opting into Quarks mode and not working correctly in Quarks mode, which meant fundamentally it broke on IE, worked in other browsers, because the developers didn't understand this very complex hierarchy that we built. It would have worked fine in IE 6, 7, 8, 9, and even 10 had the doc type met the rules that are established that are really hard to understand. So yeah, this stuff is hard for developers to get their heads around. They just want to make a web page and don't necessarily think like, wow, which of these 4 engines am I getting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. It's more of a hierarchy or decision tree than a simple matrix. So yeah, I think it is complex. I think that might be one of the problems we're experiencing now in getting these apps working. I think it's sort of the question of what is the problem, and then implementing it with the right decision trees. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and that's an interesting question. Is where is it going to work? Well, let me just try it. Trying it in all 4 is more expensive, right? The more you add, you'd kind of like to know, will it work in, not only just in IE9, but IE9 with 9 standards, 8 standards, 7 standards, or Quarks. Which of these 4 work? Yeah. And let me pick the highest one. But testing it 4 times is 4 times as expensive as testing it in 1. So I need to decide, is it an optimization task, or do I just need to get this one working? Well, and that would depend upon the importance of the app.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Chris, What do you think the enterprise take-up of IE9 has been, and do you think it's better to jump straight from IE6 to IE9?
So we've been working with a number of customers, and the ones who are going to IE9 today are the ones who are on IE8 already. And clearly they were also folks who were already on at least Windows Vista. And, you know, I've been, doesn't have, I think, close to 24 customers so far that I've worked with personally. And you know, I think across the board what we're seeing is that people are finding this to be just really, really easy. I mean, so the first obstacle to overcome for customers who are on IE8 is, you know, wow, I'm a little bit fatigued, particularly if I came from 6 and it also included a Windows migration. I'd like to just take a breath before I go, because, you know, if it's going to be anywhere near that hard, I want to make sure I've got the energy to do that. But what we're finding, yes, what we're finding is that those who do make that jump are finding it very easy. And I mean, it's not statistically valid necessarily. It's very anecdotal. It's about 12.5 customers that I've worked with. They are large enterprise customers, so you know, those in a different market it may not apply to. Also, I just want to qualify, you know, the quality of the data. It wasn't a survey, but I have thus far in the customers I've worked with come across a grand total of 3 bugs across all of those customers that weren't resolved by leveraging the compatibility engine that's shipped with the browser. To just literally say, oh, run this in IE8 mode, IE7 mode, or Quirks mode, and it starts working for anyone who is running it on IE8 already, right? And those 3 bugs have been a versioning issue where it's not checking the version of the browser, it's actually checking the version of the scripting engine.
That's right. I think
which
you
has been
mentioned
revved
before, and that's actually a great, almost like what I'd call a classic problem with compatibility now. That the version checking for your operating system, your script, your rendering engine, and getting your logic checks wrong. Is that it?
Because they tried actually. It's the check to see if the version, the major version of the scripting engine is greater than or equal to 5, and the minor version is greater than or equal to 5. So guess what the version of the scripting engine is in IE9? 9.0. Is 9 greater than or equal to 5? Yeah, pass. Is 0 greater than or equal to 5? Nope, fail, and therefore it's a invalid, unsupported scripting engine.
You know what's wonderful? I think if we ran an app compat class, the first section of it would be on logic and or, and how to construct a proper conditional statement. Because that's probably the biggest challenge, isn't it? Like for desktop apps and for web apps, I'm seeing as well.
Sure. Well, I think it's hard to write in general. I don't think it's that people, you know, just are dumb. You know, I have asked the question, you know, so when I get to this, you know, I've asked the questions many times, which is, you know, how would you write this check? You know, and there's someone who's brave enough to stand up and say, I will write pseudocode in front of my peers. You know, this one, you know, seems like it's going to be solvable. And they always write it exactly the same way, which will fail exactly as this one did, because it seems intuitive. Yeah. And, you know, person after person, in all of the customers I've worked with, there's been one person at one customer who got it right. And his solution was actually, I thought, fairly clever. He multiplied the major version by 100 and added the minor version, thus making it the single number that looks an awful lot like what we do inside of MSI.
Absolutely. In fact, what he was doing, which is what we do, is what I call bit masking. He just put it over 2 columns, and then you can just assign it a binary value.
Yep.
That's exactly, That's the only way I've ever been successfully able to do that. And that also supports the major, minor, and subversions as well, right? So times 100 times 10,000 to give it 2 zeros across.
Yep, one person got that right. Almost everyone gets that wrong because it's genuinely hard and seems counterintuitive. People just don't work logic often enough to have that muscle be something that's exercised. So we ran into that one. We had a rendering issue, which was using DirectX filters, applying it to a table. They happened to be, by happy accident, it applied to the child elements instead of the table itself. The happy accident went away as we made IE itself a DirectX application, and so the shadow fell under the entire table, thus making the black text on top of the black shadow a little bit hard to read. Yep. And the third one was a rendering issue, which technically wasn't a blocking bug. But because they were doing pixel perfect rendering in a table,
Yep.
and because when you're doing, clear type and DirectX, and we shifted from GDI to Direct 2D, we shifted something over, by a less than 1 pixel, but that shifted it ever so slightly off, and the very definition of a table says, hey, if we don't fit, then the user agent, aka the browser, can reflow the table. We don't fit anymore because we now go from 0.4 to 0.6 pixels wide, so we give it round up instead of down. And so then we reflowed the table, which put something on 2 lines instead of 1, which made it not meet the requirements of pixel perfect. Now, you could always increase it by an extra 1 pixel as one solution. The better solution would be to say, if I need something pixel perfect, an HTML construct that will automatically move things around whenever it wants to might be the wrong construct to be using.
But again, it's that thing. It's probably not a blocker, but it's visible. And
right.
And that's the challenge, right? I think we've talked about technical compatibility issues and the political commercial. When you talk about technical compatibility issues, you also need to break them down into the severity. I guess 2 things: severity and probability. Right. So yes, you may have compatibility issues. Will it affect your business? Is it likely to happen? Right. Those are the questions, and I think that's a good example of something that's visible, but probably not severe, and maybe under some certain conditions, probably not highly probable. So I think that's what I'm experiencing with a lot of the IE9 stuff. It's technically possible to demonstrate some of the issues like that, but they're low probability and generally they're low impact. Probably, I think, is that what you're saying?
Exactly, and a lot of the sorts of things that I noticed that people are doing in the enterprise aren't the sorts of things that tend to go wrong. We had a number of things that were challenges for folks who were really investing a lot in maximizing everything about some early investments in HTML5 and really trying to push the envelope. And some of those folks found that they had a few challenges along the way, as they sort of sorted out where things would fall into all the browsers, because they're all moving targets. I mean, a lot of them are revving every couple of months these days. So there are some generic challenges there, but in the enterprise, it's just different. People aren't trying to push the envelope; they're just trying to run their business.
Yep.
And there's not anything to differentiate. They don't have time to think about differentiating at that level, so they just want to get the job done, but make it a pleasant experience for everyone who's using it. So we found it overall from 8 to 9, that process really easy. I think the real question, and probably what Emily was asking for, is, well, what if I'm on 6? If I'm on 6, then by definition I'm on XP.
Yes.
And kind of the real branching point I get is I've in the early adopters, and I've noticed that there's a difference. The first wave of folks who are migrating to Windows 7 were doing it big bang. They were doing Windows 7, Office 2007 or Office 2010, IE8. They're often deploying a new version of SCCM and new antivirus and sort of everything in one big pow.
Yeah.
In the mainstream, the people who are going, up, in the past year or so, and up to and including now, are probably the majority of them are breaking it up into smaller bits. So they're going to do, Office as a separate project that finishes whenever it finishes, and then IE is a separate project. So they're concerned about getting an IE on XP that's more modern than 6. And a big pressure we're seeing for that is SharePoint 2010, which is pushing a lot of people to get off of 6 because it doesn't work with it. So we're seeing a lot of people pushing that, and the question that comes in is, well, if I'm going to 8 on XP, because that's the highest one I can get there, for my Windows 7 desktop, should I have it be 8 so that it's the same, or 9 so that it's 9 and I don't have to do another deployment? And my answer for that is normally 9. Right? If I'm on 7 on anything, I wouldn't go 8 and then 9. I would just go straight to 9. If I'm on 6 and I'm going anywhere else, I would finish that project first. To me, there's nothing more. Your candle's burning on both ends. You've got stuff that doesn't. If you have stuff that doesn't work on anything but 6 today, you've got that end of the candle burning. But there's lots of stuff and more stuff being created every day that doesn't work on 6. So it doesn't work on anything but 6 and doesn't work on 6 are obviously directly in conflict. I need to blow one of those ends of the candle out, and it's going to be hard to stem the release of new technology, so it's obviously more sensible to blow out my dependency on things that only work on 6 as fast as I can.
And I think there's actually a couple of interesting points in what you're saying right there. The first one is, I think it's a move from IE6, so it's not move to IE8 or IE9. It's solving the problem from IE6 as a primary job one. And once you get away from that, then you can make some rational decisions. What I also heard there, which is really interesting to me, was that the early adopters use what I would call an aggregate approach to the migration. We're going to take all this stuff, it's all new, and we're going to have it. And as you say, new antivirus, new software, new Office, new build, new browser, the whole lot. But you're saying now, and we're seeing this as well, is that the middle adopters, now the later adopters, are taking what would be, I guess, a disaggregated approach of saying, we'll just do the build, and just do this. In the next 6 months, we're going to see a little bit more of this on top, and then in a year, we'll put Office. And so it sounds like it's sort of breaking up the migration chunks or efforts a little bit for the mainstream as compared to this big bang, get it all new right now for the new adopters.
Which makes sense if you think about it. I mean, the folks who are early adopters are obviously willing to incur more risk for more benefits. If you've waited, you're more risk averse, and by taking a slice at a time, it does cost you more, but it also controls risk a little bit more, and we're hitting the more risk averse folks. You know, I think our goal, I think we've got sort of 2 goals for what we want to do from a product perspective. You know, one of them is to lower the risk overall and continue to prove that, so people don't feel that they need to, to put it out of proportion, that they should balance the risk in proportion to how much risk there actually is, and not into, fear or perceived risk.
Yeah, exactly. The fear factor there, I think, is absolutely.
So we've seen a release cycle of just 4 weeks between the final release for IE9 and the first release of IE10. Chris, do you think people will skip out IE9 completely and move straight to IE10?
See, I'm finding it fair. IE9 is a pretty easy sell because of the incredibly high compatibility for anyone who's already on 8, number 1, and the immediate benefits from the performance improvements we made in the rewrite to the JavaScript engine, among many other things. I mean, yes, there's all the crazy demos of how you can have hundreds of fish swimming around really, really, really fast, which of course has no business relevance to any of my customers. What's important is you can put them in front of an application that used to be slow, and then suddenly it's as fast as everything else, right? That used to be where we took a lot of our lumps was, we've got this very script-heavy thing, and it's a little bit too slow in IE. Now, it always confuses me how they manage to ship software that doesn't meet their requirements and be happy with it, and then suddenly stop being happy with it. But that happens a lot, and then we say, okay, well, you have this immediate benefit. You have very high compatibility, so the risk is low.
Yep.
The cost is much lower than it was. I mean, the big transition was 6 to 7. 7 to 8 was a little bit smaller, and 8 to 9 is really, really, really small. So my costs are low, my risk is low, my benefit is immediate. And I've got a little bit of end user training because we've made it look a little different if I'm coming, particularly from 6, but from 8 to 9, it doesn't look so different that it's jarring.
Right.
So, we have a relatively low cost and an immediate benefit. And I think the other important construct is, in addition to the benefit of, hey, my scripts run faster, is determining what's my strategy going to be around HTML5.
Yep, exactly. So you think that IE9 is an easy sell, and people, if you've done it, you should be able to get there and do it and kick off a IE9 migration and get that going.
Mm-hmm. That's what I'm seeing. So I'm not seeing anyone saying, oh, it's, I wish this had, here's a laundry list of features it would need for it to be good enough for me. And I think the benefit of us continuing to have the, compatibility infrastructure that allows you to leverage new features like HTML5 with less risk, also makes it a way to start realizing some of those benefits right now. Because think about it, HTML5 is not done. And if I target HTML5 as it exists today, as the standards continue to evolve and change on the path to becoming recommendations, then anything I have that's implemented on today's implementation of the specs, the unfinished ones, will break if the specs change, and many of them
Absolutely.
are. But the ability to go in and say, I'm going to use HTML5 starting today, and I can do it on IE9, and I can say, you know what, I'm going to tag it here and say, you know what, this has been tested and runs on IE9. IE10 can read that and go, okay, I'll run you in IE9 mode. So I don't have to go back and rewrite all of my websites just because IE10 came out. I can say, yep, these will all just continue to run. So then IE10 becomes a very low-risk upgrade, and I can start taking advantage of those new features and get on that train. HTML5 from all of the vendors just appears to be really important. You've got us behind it, incorporating it into Windows 8. Clearly, Google is behind it very much with Chrome on the PC, also with the Chrome operating system that's able to leverage that as a big platform feature. You've got Apple behind it with Safari. You've got Firefox behind it, with their browser. I mean, everyone is throwing their weight behind the ability to create these impressive, very high fidelity, beautiful apps with pure HTML that's interoperable.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that's interesting. I'm delighted you're thinking that, because I'm definitely agreeing with some of the things you're saying.
Well, thank you very much, Chris, for spending the time with us today. Have you got any final thoughts on the Internet Explorer Challenge for us?
I would like to say thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure to sit and kind of geek out with you guys and talk about where we're going together, and kind of trade war stories, and sort of postulate in the future and where we're going. From my perspective, I think the important thing is to continue moving forward, right? So anyone who's currently on XP, or currently on IE6, or currently on Office 2003, I think there's a lot of value in moving forward. We want to make sure that we're providing whatever help we can, and we've got a rich partner ecosystem to provide additional help to really build a comprehensive end-to-end solution to move forward. So number one is get off where you are as a point-in-time migration. And I think the other thing to take into consideration is, are there things you can be doing as you're doing this transition to make future transitions easier? The end result being, I'm not as concerned about, can I use IE blah, 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 or Windows blah, blah, blah. What I'm more concerned about is, have I become more agile, so that if business demands that I am able to adopt a new platform in order to leverage some of that technology, that my technology infrastructure allows me to be as agile as my business needs to be.
Well, thank you very much to Chris and to you, Greg, for the time you spent talking about Internet Explorer with us today. If you'd like to hear more about AOK Browse It, which is ChangeBASE's automated browser compatibility testing capability, you can look at www.changebase.com, go to our product pages. You can also test Browse It for free using AOK Lite. If you want to have more information about AOK Lite, please go to www.changebase.com/AOK Lite. Thank you for listening. This has been a ChangeBASE podcast about Internet Explorer.